Hey there, welcome to the Jewish Adulting Podcast. Thank you for joining me today on your adulting journey. Before we get started, can you do me a quick favor? Can you hit the like and subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to this? I promise it's not a lifetime commitment, but when you don't subscribe, it's kind of like coffee without caffeine. What are we even doing here? Or like latkes without applesauce? Are we even living our best life? When you subscribe, you not only give me warm, fuzzy feelings, but you're also helping me bring amazing guests who rely on subscriber counts to know whether joining me is a worthy endeavor. More subscribers mean more epic conversations for you. And hey, if you're feeling extra generous, you can also show your support by becoming a monthly supporter at buymeacoffee.com/Jewish adulting. Whether it's $1, $5, $10, or even $20, every little bit helps make this podcast rolling. Of course, if you're sitting on a cool million or even looking to sponsor the show, reach out to me at jewishadulting@gmail.com. Also, I'm always looking out for engaging, thoughtful, passionate guests to join me. So if you want to nominate someone or want to come on the podcast yourself, reach out. Let's make a podcast shidduch.
This is Rabbi Ben-Zion Schaefer of the Shmooze.com. Jewish adulting is about shining a light on parts of ourselves in order to do Avodas Hashem with all the tools and resources at our disposal. It is an honor and a privilege to have every day to further refine our character and grow closer to Hashem. Take advantage of these opportunities before it's too late.
Hello, everybody. This is your host, Chedva Rose, for the Jewish Adulting Podcast. I have with me today Sarah Pachter, who is an award-winning, sought-after speaker and author, and she is actually on the slate of the upcoming World Zionist Congress election. And I want to be totally honest with you, Sarah. First of all, thank you for being here, but also, I don't even know what that means. I don't know what a slate for the Zionist Congress election, what does that mean? So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and honor to be a guest on your podcast.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to be here. And it's a great question what you're asking, because most people, when they hear about it, they're like, what is that? I have no idea. What are you talking about? So basically, I'm part of a slate, which means a group of people that are running together as delegates for the World Zionist Congress. Now, they meet once every 5 years. This is in Israel, and they address the most pressing issues for the Jewish people. I'm going to give you an example. Tell me if you've heard of this before. This is like history in the making. Many, many years ago, do you remember learning about in Jewish history that Uganda was offered to the Jewish people as a refuge after the Holocaust to be their homeland? Do you remember that?
I did not know that.
Yes. So initially, when we were figuring out what are we going to do with the Jews after the Holocaust, Uganda was offered to us to be our homeland. And it was at one of the first World Zionist Congress where we rejected that offer. We stood strong and we said, no, we want to return to Israel. So it is like the most, and that was a crucial decision for the Jewish people, obviously.
Yeah.
And so some of the most crucial decisions are made at this Congress. And obviously today we're facing some really critical issues as well. But to kind of break it down, why it's so important that Aish Ha'am, which is part of, a lot of people have heard of Aish.com, but have not heard of Aish Ha'am. But basically Aish has a slate. They brought together about 200 delegates to hopefully be there. But essentially, if you break it down into one sentence, the WZO, the World Zionist Organization, has approximately, get this, this is crazy, $1.5 billion in resources to give out to Jewish organizations throughout the world. And so it's really, really crucial. I'm running with Aish Ha'am because they really reflect my values. First of all, they're combating anti-Semitism left and right. They're fostering Jewish unity, and they're providing free Jewish education. So I'm running with that team to try to secure seats. Everyone's really working hard to try to secure seats, which is really, really important because you want to make sure that the people that are on the World Zionist Congress are reflecting your values. And so this is the first time that Aish has really put together a delegation to be able to run and have seats and hopefully to secure resources and hopefully to really push really pressing issues.
So how did like you get involved with it. Tell me a little bit about what you do on a regular basis. And I said you're an author and a lecturer, but how did this come about?
Great question. Okay, so I do. I'm an author. I'm a speaker. I've been speaking for about 19 years, and I have written 2 books. I've been writing for about a little over 10 years. I would say 10, 12 years. And I do a ton of writing for a lot of the different Jewish magazines and websites, Ami, Jewish Press, Jewish Home, Com, I mean, all Jewish Journal, a lot of them. And so I do a ton of writing for Aish.com. And one of my articles actually, I broke some sort of record where they had about 100,000 views in 2 days. So I think, based on what Aish tells me, that I'm viewed as one of their widely read authors, and so they asked me to be part of their slate. And what I'm doing specifically with my writing, especially after October 7th, is I've been interviewing all sorts of people that have been affected by October 7th. So we're talking about Jewish students being bullied on campus on the daily. I've interviewed, the president of UC Santa Barbara, parents whose children were murdered in the Nova Festival. For example, just to give you a quick snapshot of one of them, their son was murdered. Unbelievable. Instead of wallowing in their pain and instead of isolating themselves from the world, from how painful this has been, they made a decision. They are jewelers. And the father made a decision. He said, any Israeli soldier that wants to get engaged, I'm going to give you a free diamond ring. It's unbelievable. And he's given over 100 diamond rings to any Jewish Israeli soldier. I mean, that is the most amazing response of the Jewish people, to take something painful and turn it into purpose. I interviewed an IDF soldier that was shot in the head 3 times. And one of the bullets, this is crazy, one of the bullets got stuck in the padding of the helmet. Like, it makes no sense that it did not hurt him. And yet somehow this took place. So here I am, I'm interviewing all these people. I'm looking them in the eyes. And I have to hear these stories of pain. I have to hear, some of them are miraculous and some of them are amazing, but some of them are really painful. And at that point, I was like, I have to do something. I can't just talk to these people. Like, there has to be some action. And that's really the WZO comes in, because if we stand up for their story is our story. We're all one as Jews. So I really believe, even if you're not running as a delegate, every Jew has an obligation to vote. It is literally a mitzvah. It's an easy way to secure funds for Jewish organizations around the world. And it's crucial at this time with all that's going on campuses and throughout the world. So it's super easy. I mean, you just sign up to vote. It's aish.com/vote. And it takes 2 seconds, and the voting takes place in March, but we need to register now.
So it sounds like you're turning the pain into purpose as well. From listening to people's stories, you want to actually do something, not just be like a sympathetic listener, but to actually make a difference in their lives in some way to combat all that they've been through.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's sort of my contribution, so to speak.
Right. That's beautiful. So basically, I think that you and I, we discussed, what are we going to talk about? What I wanted to say first was, at this point, I'm going to do a recommendation. I don't ever do this. I don't think I've ever done this. My one thing is that, since you brought up hearing people's stories about October 7th, there's an incredible book by Rabbi Pachter called Angels in Orange. And I just want to encourage people to listen to this book, or to read this book. I'm sorry. It is incredible. And you see, like, the Nisim and the courage that people had on that day it's just beyond. And it's from a perspective of people who they had to do something. They couldn't cower in the corner. They stepped forward. And so it's really an incredible book. And you just reminded me that I think in America specifically, there is people sort of trying to disconnect from the horror of it, but speaking from being a responsible adult and feeling the pain of our brothers and sisters, that knowing the stories is kind of an obligation as well, that we don't just hide our heads and say, like, oh yeah, that sounds terrible. It's like, to understand really what happened and how to prevent it from happening again. And what kinds of things we need to do, take on for ourselves, whether it be spiritual or financial or all the different things. So you could actually listen to a podcast about that by Rabbi Mordechai Pachter if you're interested. But okay, so let's get into the topic that we decided we were going to talk about today. So I think that one of the things that I was hoping to talk about, because it comes up for me actually quite a bit, is the topic of tznius. And I think that I don't feel like this topic is as popular as it used to be, which is kind of ironic considering all the tznius challenges that we face nowadays. And so I thought, let's talk about this in a way that is current and relevant. And not just about the nitty gritty of like, what are the halachos of tznius. I don't think that that's a podcast that I want to listen to, but I really want to talk more about, in a world where women have so many rights and are so out there, where can that tznius first of all come into play and show us meaning and purpose? So I guess the first step in understanding that is understanding what tznius means beyond just covering yourself up.
Great question. It's so true that it's not as popular as it used to be, perhaps. And I think it's because it's really hard. I will tell you that it's interesting. I actually conducted an actual survey. Yes, I did. I was preparing for a lecture for a topic on modesty, and I wanted to get on the ground and really hear the perspective of Jewish women across the globe on this topic of modesty. I wanted to hear from them. So I'm going to tell you what happened in this survey. It was eye-opening to me. I'll tell you what the survey was, and we can even do the survey together. So we'll do a real deal situation.
Okay, so I love when my guests are like, let's be vulnerable. Tell me what you don't know and what you're not doing. Okay, let's go. Let's do it.
Okay, good. So this survey, you should know, first of all, was done with female participants from around the world, not just America. I made sure to have a really wide ranged demographic. Okay, so age-wise, it was from 9 years old all the way up to 70 years old.
Wow.
And I also wanted to make sure that it was varying religious backgrounds. So traditional, conservative, reform, Orthodox, the whole Hasidish, the whole gamut. Okay.
Okay.
I asked one question. We're going to do it right now.
Okay.
One question, okay? And despite the fact that I asked only one question, and even though there was a hugely ranging demographic, 75% gave the exact same answer.
Wow.
Are you ready for this?
Okay. I'm ready.
Here was the question. Given the following choices, what is the word you associate most with the noun modesty? And I gave them choices, so I'm going to give you choices. Word number 1, character. Word number 2, clothing. Word number 3, unattractive. 4, hair. And 5, difficult. What would you choose?
Oh, wow. For me, it's character, but I can imagine that wasn't the answer. Let me guess the answer. Was it unattractive?
Great response. Actually, the answer for most people was clothing.
Okay.
Or not. And the up was what you said was character. But there was a caveat for a lot of people that said character, just like you had a caveat. They would say, well, character is probably the right answer, but I often think of clothing or unattractive or difficult, right? But clothing was really the predominant answer. And basically, most people associate modesty with clothing, but in fact, clothing is one small aspect of modesty. And this is what I really want to talk about today.
Yeah. So I mentioned at the start when I was introducing the topic that this is a topic that comes up for me. So I'll tell you when it comes up for me, because I like to just bare my soul, give too much information, which is that my children are wholly embarrassed by everything I say and do, because I talk to people in the grocery store and on an elevator, and people come up to me and they tell me their life story, and my kids are like, oh my gosh, stop talking to the teller, like be more modest. And I'm like, it's like this weird, I guess, I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know if they're right. I'm asking you a question, really. But is there validity to the fact that I should go out in public and not interact with people? Why is that viewed as something that's a modest trait? Obviously, I'm not like exchanging phone numbers and flirting with the tellers. It's not a flirtatious type of relationship that I'm having with these strangers. But it comes up for my kids who are like, oh my gosh, stop talking to people. And it brings up the issue of modesty for the sake of character and being out there.
That's a really good point and a good question. So first of all, let's just unpack that for a second. Okay. I think that kids are embarrassed of their parents no matter what you do. Like if you were too quiet, they'd be like, Mom, you're so quiet. Like, why can't you talk to people? Right. Or you chew or the way you drink, like they'll get irritated depending on their age. So
Right.
put that on the side. But I think it's a good point what you're bringing up. Like, what is modesty exactly? So what's funny, because in the English language, modesty really has this connotation of really negative undertones, right? Like the phrase, he's a man of modest means, that's sort of like a tactful way of saying like he's not financially successful,
Right.
or this connotation of being less than or meek or lacking or shy. But shy relating to what you're talking about, whether you talk to people or not. This is not the Jewish view of modesty, right? We're calling it modesty for the sake of simplicity, but tznius is entirely different. So I'm going to tell you a working definition that I came up with, which is actually published in my book, my second book. But after gathering a lot of Torah sources and speaking with different scholars and really researching the topic, doing like a deep dive, I came up with the following working definition. Modesty is a character trait equally obligatory for men and women that helps us reflect our godliness, our inner soul. So in other words, it's about using discretion to reflect your soul. It's putting people's eye inward rather than externally. So now that I've qualified that the essence of modesty is character, then you can talk about what that means clothing, what that means speaking, what that means talking to people. But you have to know that it's an inner essence. It's not that you're shy. It's not that you're lacking. It's actually knowing that you're great, recognizing you have beautiful, unbelievable traits that were given to you by God. And because they were given to you by God, you now have a responsibility to do something positive with it. So if you were given the trait of not being shy, right, and you're able to talk to anyone and people connect to you and they come to you with their problems or whatever the case may be, you're actually doing what tzniut is by tapping into that power and doing something positive with it. Recognizing you're great, recognizing it comes from Hashem, and then realizing you have a responsibility to do something powerful with that.
Right. So I love that. I'm wondering, like, a lot of times I ask people to go back to a source. Where in Tanakh or where in from our Gedolim do we learn that modesty is even a thing that we should be tapping into as a strength and channeling? Like where do we see that?
Good. It's a great question, and it's an important question because you always want a Jewish topic that you're really framing it in the realm of Torah and not just like randomly coming up with ideas that you believe or you think, etc. So there's actually a bunch of sources. Interestingly enough, the majority of them have to do with character and behavior versus clothing. But I'm going to kind of quickly run you through for anybody who's interested. So here we go. First, we have Parsha Ki Sisa 34:3. Okay, that's a predominant one that I want to focus on. This is when Hashem was giving us the luchot. Okay, the tablets, the commandments. The first round of luchot, the first round of tablets, were given with fanfare. Right, the whole world knew about this. Everybody knew the Jews were getting the Torah. What happened to those luchot? They were broken eventually. And then here we have in Shemot 34:3, what's happening? God's now giving us a second set of luchot because we want to know, where do we come up with the word tzniut itself? Where do we see that in the Torah? So here Hashem is giving us a second set of luchot, but it's a much more private affair. It's only between Hashem and the Jewish people. The world doesn't know about it. It's not this whole shebang. And Hashem writes, there is nothing more beautiful than tzniut. There's nothing more beautiful than tznius. And Rashi explains there is no finer quality than to be tznius, meaning private, unostentatious, and modest, so to speak. Let me give you another predominant source really quickly. You have Micha 6:8. Walk humbly with Hashem. Now, those are nice sources and everything. Okay, it uses the word tzniut, right, or the core of the word tzniut. But what does to be humble and modest actually mean? And where do clothing lines come in?
Yeah.
If we want to talk about clothing for a second, let's just briefly do this. There's a ton of sources on modesty. I believe that Malki does a really beautiful job of elucidating it. She wrote an article on Chabad.org. It's a beautiful answer that she gives. There's basically three components. You got dat Yehudit, das Yehudis, and minhag. That's basically the three. Now let me break it down. The first source of dat Moshe means from the Torah, written Torah itself. So one example of that you have in Bamidbar 5:18. It's the source for covering hair. That's where it talks about how the Kohen uncovered the woman's head. And from there, we recognize and we extrapolate that a woman's hair was constantly covered. Look at Dat Yehudit for a second. This means the law of Jewish women. And here's where we talk about the Talmud. This is the one that everybody, here's the core one where all the clothing lines come from. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Talmud 24a. This is a shocker, by the way. I'm about to do a shocking situation. It's okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
The shok, or the thigh of a woman, is considered erva, it's considered nudity, and should be covered. Now, here's where we have our shock effect. What is a shok? We're translating it as a thigh. Here's where it gets to be like, what does that actually mean? So what do you think it means, the thigh?
Oh, well, it sounds pretty literal. I would say the part, like your legs.
Okay, good. But I'm saying, so why is it shocking? Because actually most opinions agree that it's the area from below the knee to the ankle, which is shocking because then you're like, wait a second, this is confusing because conversationally we consider the thigh the upper portion. Okay,
Right.
now you want to kick me out of here, and every Orthodox woman is like, what are you saying? I don't cover necessarily the bottom portion of my leg. There's tons of Orthodox women who do not. Like, what are you saying, Sarah? So the Mishnah in 75:2 says that there are cases where the shok is considered the upper portion, but from the knee up, and only that must be covered. So if a woman chooses to be lenient, she really does have reputable sources to rely upon. It does not have to be the lower portion from the knee to the ankle, although, there's obviously many different opinions. But here's where it's really fascinating. So this Dat Yehudi, this law of the Jewish women, it basically puts into the woman's hands the choice to determine what is best for her because she has reliable sources. Think about this for a second. No other halacha in the Torah says, oh, just rely on what you believe inwardly to do. We don't do that with kashrut. No, there's all these things in place to make sure checks and balances. But here we are. The woman is trusted completely because Hashem says that a woman has an innate sense of modesty. And I can rely on you, Hashem says, to make the proper decision with your dress and demeanor. We also see this, by the way, that the women are trusted all the time because when it comes to nida and nida questions, there's nobody watching over the woman. If she has a question, she goes to a Rav, but there's no supervision when it comes to the halachot related to women. And that's a powerful statement that women are trusted, women are powerful, and they call the shots.
Right. So this is very interesting. I couldn't help but think as you were going through the sources that there are times where you could even say, one of the examples you gave was where Hashem gave the Torah, the second luchos, and he did it modestly. It wasn't the same fanfare as it had been with the first one. But we do know that our avos and imahos, they acted with modesty. We know that the tent was done in such a way that people weren't looking into each other's business and sort of staying in their lane. And there are other times where we know that Noah's modesty was not preserved and his son was punished for that. There's a lot of times where modesty does come up, sometimes as a character, sometimes as a actual covering of protecting of someone's physical attractiveness. Sarah was beautiful, and they hid her in the box and to protect her from Paro. And there is a lot of times where, as I reflect on the different sources, where modesty in different ways is brought up. And someone said to me, one of the biggest challenges for this generation is, why do you think that is such a challenge for this generation?
I love this question. And I think it's such an important one, and it really reflects exactly what you're talking about. I honestly believe that it's such a challenge for our generation because there is such a need in today's world to be seen, to be heard, to be out there. Privacy has really kind of been thrown out the window. And so there's this really big urge and drive to do what everyone's doing and to be out there and to be seen. And that's really what I believe. I think it's a good question. And I think because of the generation that we're living in, where it's so normal to be completely out there.
Right.
Privacy is the basic need. Privacy is a basic need for human beings. And because we're not honoring that, we're actually dealing with some really negative ramifications. If I can just talk about social media for a second, I know you didn't like expressly bring that up, but I do work with people who have large followings, and I mentor them. We learn together, and also I've interviewed many people with huge, massive followings online, and I've found a pattern that yes, it's wonderful, the process of gaining that type of notoriety. It really is very nice, but what starts to happen is, well, two things. First of all, I've seen where externally this social media influencer has a perfect life. Everything about what they do is absolutely perfect. But behind the scenes, they have depression. They can't get out of bed till 3 p.m. Right? There's mental just erupting from this type of notoriety. And another thing that I've noticed starts to happen, and I think this is more pressing for everybody listening, is that let's say person X, right? I'm not going to say a name. They get a bunch of followers, they have a lot of attention on, let's call it on Instagram or whatever they're using, whatever TikTok, whatever they're using. And then the reactions start to slow. So in order to get attention again, they have to up the ante. They have to do something more shocking to get that feedback loop and to keep their followers engaged. So a woman might choose to use more revealing behavior, more shocking words, more shocking clothing, just to engage more people. And that's really, it becomes dangerous because it's morphing people's personalities and it's morphing people's mental health. If what I post today doesn't excite or shock enough people, we start to go to the extremes.
Well, I want to say that I'm extremely modest and I have a very modest following, and it's all because of this. No, but in all seriousness, I think, well, first of all, there's what you said is people really want to be seen, and I think that this is part of like the outside world influencing the Jewish world, right? There's a couple things. One is that the fashion styles, if we're going to talk about clothes for just a minute, the fashion styles have evolved to be more immodest. I mean, people are wearing half clothing. I mean, they're not even wearing full pieces of articles of clothing. So that has got to affect in some way the style and the availability of modest clothing, and people tend to, that we could talk about that. But I also think that in general, there is in the non-Jewish world, which is having a tremendous impact because of the internet and because of media and whatnot, in a way that it might not have in the past, to influence the modesty of the Jewish home and to break down so much of what we hold dear and so much of the what really gives us a uniqueness in preserving the modesty and the sanctity of the home. So, I mean, it's not really a question. It's more like my take on it. Of course, I'm not a subject matter expert, so whatever, it's just my opinion. But I mean, there's a lot about outside influences, but when we are building our character as we're sort of developing as people, where do you find that people could practice modesty, especially in today's society? Where could we practice modesty? What does that look like?
Yeah, very good. So I think there's really two ways that you can work on modesty. And this is something that I learned from Rebbitzin Sephora Heller, who was a teacher of mine. She's an amazing human being, and Rebbitzin. But there's really two ways, and that's from the outside in or from the inside out. So you can change your garb, you can change your clothing, you can work on having more modest dress and hope that it affects your internals, or you can work on the character trait and hope that it kind of expresses itself outward. She actually believes that working inwardly out is more effective and more long-term. And I'll tell you a personal story. I was actually very surprised when I met with her. I was actually single. I remember this meeting. I was single. I was coming to her. I had a very loose top on, very loose skirt on. And I came to her and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to work more on modesty. I want to work more on tznius. What should I do next? And she looked at me. I was very surprised by her answer. She said, Sarah, you're sneeze, like you're dressed modestly. She's like, what you really have to work on and what people really have to work on is the character. Because if you don't work on the character, it's not going to last. You're not going to stick with it. And I so appreciated what she said, because so many teachers, Rebbitzins, would just give you another chumrah, give you something else to work on physically. But she understood the essence of something is so much deeper. It's about something going on inside. And to kind of, if you don't mind for a second, to kind of back that up, I mean, unless you have a different question, but to kind of back that up, if you look at this outside versus inside thing for just a second, let me explain. So imagine you're driving, okay, and you're at an intersection and there's a policeman and he's like barking out orders and he's moving his arms to help with the flow of traffic. Can you visualize this?
I can, yes.
Now let's imagine you're at the same intersection. It's a policeman. He's doing the same order, same barking out of everything, same hand gestures, but now he's wearing a pirate costume. You're going to probably relate to him a little differently based on what he's wearing, right?
Right. I mean, you don't take it seriously. You're like,
Exactly.
this guy for real.
So as much as, yes, working on the character is important, the clothing is also important because people view us differently based on how we're dressed, point blank. And it's not always a conscious thing. Like imagine you're at the same intersection and this guy starts approaching your car. His hair is disheveled, his clothing is dirty. He might look like he's under the influence of something, and he starts to approach your car and you see there's like a makeshift tent 10 feet away from him. This is not politically correct, but like, what would you do if that happened?
Lock my doors.
Yes, right? But here's my question. It's not like you're sitting there and you're like, there's a random man approaching my car. Let me lock my door. What happens? Boom, your hand just instinctively goes. It's not even conscious. We're looking at people. The guy hasn't opened his mouth.
Right.
I'm not saying anything differently, but we snap decisions based on what people look like and what they're dressed like. So if someone is wearing a crop top, right, versus someone wearing business attire, we might think a little differently. But here's where it gets good. More importantly, right, not only does our clothing communicate a message to other people, it also communicates a message to ourselves. And this is a concept called enclothed cognition. So in essence, not only does the policeman who is either wearing a policeman uniform or a pirate costume, not only do we look at him differently, he's going to feel differently about himself based on what he's wearing. And I want to show this to you through an example. I mean, I hope I'm not talking too much. You could stop me.
No. Continue. First of all, I just want to let the audience know that Sarah is actually struggling with a cold or something, and it's affecting your voice, so that you're even here talking to us with your sort of voice is such a mysterious nefesh. So thank you so much for talking. I'm happy to listen to examples and for you to expound on the concepts, of course.
Thank you. Yes, I do have something going on with my voice right now. It's funny because this actually happened right before the first WZO launch event that I was supposed to speak at, and I did end up speaking. So thank you for your patience with me, and I appreciate it. Yeah. But I was talking on the phone to a student, going back to what I was saying, and she told me, she said, I feel better, right, when I get dressed. I'm friendlier towards people. And she gave the example of like, when I'm wearing cute boots, when I blow out my hair, like I just feel better. And think about it. When you're disheveled, you talked about going to the grocery store and you're talking to people, when you don't feel good about how you look, and let's say like your hair's not done, or you're kind of just quickly running an errand, you may not be as friendly. I mean, you might be friendly because you're friendly to everyone, no matter what, but not everybody feels the confidence to be friendly if they don't feel like they look good on the outside, on the exterior. So how we dress and what we look like on the outside affects how we feel. But here's where I want to show you this mind-blowing experiment. Do you have a second for this mind-blowing experiment?
I sure do.
So at Northwestern University, this is just crazy. And it's sort of hard to do on a podcast without visual, but let's try. And if you have to cut it because it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but let's see if it works. So basically, two groups were asked to participate in a very, very deceptively simple activity, okay? They had to read from, they had to look at, okay? And each card had the name of a color, like the word yellow, but it was written in, for example, red ink, or the name, the color green, but written in blue ink. And they were asked to state the color, not to read the word, which is very, very hard because your brain naturally just wants to easily read the word. It's hard to like stop yourself from reading the word and saying the color. Are you following me so far?
Yes.
Half of the participants were wearing a lab coat, like a medical doctor's science coat. The other half were wearing casual clothing. What do you think the results were?
I don't know. Why didn't you tell me?
I'm totally putting you on the spot. That was like so rude, but okay.
Yeah, no, it's okay, people. I don't have all the answers.
Okay. The coded students, the ones wearing the medical lab coat, tested twice as well as basically this study was showing if you wear something that makes you think you're smart, you're going to act smarter. And don't we see that with the SATs? I know nobody takes the SATs anymore. You don't have to take the SATs anymore. But when the kids get dressed up, they do better. They perform better. But we have another layer to this study. And this is where it's really mind-boggling. You ready?
Yeah.
Follow-up study was done at Northwestern University. Same test done. And now everybody's wearing a lab coat. Some of them were wearing a lab coat that they believed and were told was a doctor's coat. The others were told this is an artist smock. Same coat, looked exactly the same, but some of them believed it was for artists. Some believed it was for doctors. Guess what happened? The ones who thought they were wearing a doctor's coat tested better. And so what this tells me is two things. Our external clothing matters, but only when we have an internal feeling associated with that clothing. So that represents the two ways to work on modesty. The external clothing matters, right? Because of it affects us externally, and how we affects the feeling inside. And that represents what Rebbetzin Sephora Heller was trying to tell me. There's two ways to work on modesty, from the outside in or from the inside out.
This sounds like dress for the job you want type of mentality, where obviously the idea is that if you want to be a successful person, dress like a successful person, and you're more likely to, sounds like, be influenced and make good decisions and possibly be able to meet your goals, because you're staying focused and you're treating your outside as you, like, as I don't know how to say this. It's like you're manifesting a life whereby you are more successful and you're smarter and you're more respected. And so much of, I mean, this is something that's just interesting. But for those of us who grew up in Jewish day schools, when they talked about modesty, so it was always about, like, you wouldn't walk around the streets of New York or something with a $1 billion diamond, or however much diamonds. Obviously, I have no idea what the industry is, how much they are in real life, but you would treasure it, and you would safeguard it, and you would, and that's like sort of the messaging that we got. Like, we're so precious that we need to guard modestly this precious soul that we have. But I also think that for the men, there's that it all comes down to what a person feels about themselves, like you mentioned. So if a person is struggling with self-esteem issues, and then they dress like they feel, so that could put a person into a spiral where they don't interact with people as much, where they are not as confident, which then affects their ability to form connections. It could be like a downward spiral if you're not dressing like you want to feel or dressing as you feel. I think that it's sort of, would you say, like a self-fulfilling prophecy to do that based on that study, right? If someone puts on a lab coat and that they say, and their thought process is like, someone smart had this, so I'm smart, so I'm going to now be more successful in my testing. It's like you said, it sounds like it's a very impactful component, but what's interesting about it, and this is sort of like my long-winded questions that I like to ask, but what's interesting about it is that you have people really just trying to be capable, functioning adults, and we're all trying to be the best that we can be, generally speaking, I would say, for the most part. And the fact that an internal process plays such a big part in that is very interesting to me.
It's true. I mean, I'll give you a funny example, sort of a superficial example. I went to a makeup counter. I don't remember which one it was, maybe NARS. I have no recollection. But I do remember that the woman who was the saleswoman there was sort of an older woman. She was in her 60s, but she looked really good. And I complimented her because I guess I'm like you. I was happy to talk to her and tell her she looked so beautiful and her skin looked youthful. And she
Mm.
was natural looking. It didn't look like she had done anything to do this. So I said, "What's your secret?" Point blank, "What's your secret to looking good and looking young?" And she said, "Look, I'm here. I'm standing at the counter. I probably should tell you it's this cream or it's that cream, and then I could get a sale." She said,
Mm.
"But do you want to know what it is?" And I'm like, "Yes, tell me. What is it?" I'm like waiting on pins and needles. She says, "You could put all the creams you want on your skin and hydrate it, but you have to hydrate from the inside out. Water, water, and more water, plain and simple. And really working from the inside out is the way to have lasting change." That's what I believe.
Right. So, and again, this brings me back to the initial question of like, why is this such an important characteristic to have? Why did Hashem, like, actually, there's another thought that I was having as we were talking about the sources was how there's times that Hashem works secretly. And actually, with it's Hanukkah now, it's the seventh day of Hanukkah. This podcast is going to be coming out after Hanukkah, but we know that, or I heard a vort that Hanukkah was one of those things that it slowly built up to become a miracle. It wasn't just an outright miracle. It's similar to Purim, where Hashem sort of like hid the victories. First, you won one victory, and then you won another, and it started becoming a pattern of victories that didn't make any sense. But you don't look at like one victory and say, "Oh, we've become victorious. Let's eat fried food." It was a slow, gradual buildup of the miracles until it culminated in the lights not having the light, not having the oil, and that ultimately, and that we won the war and we were able to go to the temple and light it, and so it all culminated. But again, going back to like Hashem does do things hidden, and I was always taught, and I'm trying to like transfer the lesson from that was that one of the things that I was taught that Hashem does these like hidden miracles as a way to give us plausible deniability of sorts, where we're able to, if we want to, say, "Oh, this is part of the natural order of things, and this is not necessarily anything to give thanks and praise for." Because if it was obvious to us the amount of sheer miracles that occupy us on a day-to-day basis, there would be very little room for choice.
Right.
And so that Hashem does things. I'm going to use the word modest, but where it's not always these great thunder and lightning and seas parting. And although it sounds like there's a time and a place for modesty, for keeping it low key, for being anonymously donating money, or anonymously, there are times and places for anonymity, and there's times and places for modesty, but there's also times and places for recognizing your strength and utilizing your strength for the good of the people and for your family. What do you have to say about that?
So much, because it's so good, all the things that you were saying. I'd love to dovetail on what you were talking about with the winning of the victories,
Yeah.
at the light of the Jewish people. And it's going to sound like I'm not dovetailing, but I am going to reconnect it if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
There's this really good analogy. It's actually my favorite analogy when it comes to modesty. And I'm going to share it with you, and then I'm going to tie it back to what you were saying about the victories. So let's imagine for a second that the Mona Lisa is going to be transferred to an American museum. Could you see this? Could you see this? I don't
Yes.
know. But let's pretend. So an entire evening is planned around this moment, right? Where it's going to be first displayed on the museum wall. And only certain select people were sent invitations, and celebrities and influencers and presidents, etc. And the whole event is filled with the upper echelons of society. The men are in tuxedos, the women are in ball gowns, the waiters are passing out champagne and appetizers. And now it's right on schedule. They're about to release this painting. It's been covered in this silk cloth to cover it. And 8 p.m. sharp, the curator pulls back the cover and exposes this masterpiece. Because by the way, tzniut is just as much about exposure at the right time as it is about covering, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So he pulls back the cover and everybody is stunned. I mean, you hear silence and then you hear like little by little, everyone's like, ooh, wow, stunning, unbelievable. I mean, you hear all the whisperings, but then after a minute or two, you realize that people are whispering about the beauty of the frame. Ooh, it's so intricate and detailed. I love the gold. And the MC is totally shocked. He's like, ladies and gentlemen, this is the one and only Mona Lisa here. Realistically, that would never happen unless the frame is so huge. Like imagine the painting is 8 inches by 8 inches, I don't know, and the frame is 6 feet by 6 feet. So it's taking the entire wall. Then the to even see the inner frame, the inner artwork. And this is actually the analogy. This is the basis for the Jewish view on modesty. Ideally, the frame and the painting should work together in harmony. That's the body and soul relationship. So when I'm talking to you, you're a soul. You're all soul. But as humans, I don't see that soul. I only see the external. But there's so much more to you than what you look like or what you own or what you do. And if your body changes, which for all of us it does eventually, and if your face changes, for all of us it does, you're still a soul. Modesty means toning down the exterior, reducing the bragging, reducing the bling, so people are forced to look inward at the painting. It's about discretion with our words and actions, which forces people to look inward. But hey, it doesn't mean to make yourself look plain, not at all. Because a 6-foot frame for the Mona Lisa, that's disproportionate, but replacing it with like a cheap IKEA or Amazon frame would also be distasteful. It should reflect the inner and the outer should reflect and work in harmony to show people who you really are. And here's what I'm going to tie it back to what you were saying with those wars and the Jewish people. You don't want the externals to blind the power of your internals, the power of your internals. And that's the light of the Jewish people at large. When we talk about Israel and we talk about these wars, obviously we won the wars for Hanukkah, but let's talk about now. Israel has not survived because of the mighty army of Tzahal. Now, I have cousins that are in the Israeli army. My first cousins, they would be so mad at me if I said that, right? They're part of the they're right. They're brilliant. They're strong. They're capable. But guess what? So is every other army. It's not light that has won the wars throughout these years. It's our light. As Jews, we have a flame. We have a neshama that's never going to die. It's not because Sahal is the best trained that we haven't lost a war. It's because there's an inner flame inside of every one of us, you and I and everybody. And that's a piece of Hashem. Miracle after miracle after miracle, Hashem has sustained us through the years because there's something inside keeping us alive. So we always want to draw the world towards our inner light, because when the focus is external, whether it's attention or social media or the way we dress or the bragging, we're not letting people see the inside. And that's the real power of every Jew, man or woman.
Right. So I love that. I also can't help but think about Esav, where he was such an external character, where he said, give me the red, where he was worried about having this world, not the next world. And obviously the lesson is not to, like, the Yetzer Hara is what wants to focus on prosperity, is based on how much you have and what you look like and what you're able to accomplish in this world, where what we want as Jewish people is to understand the tie in between our soul and Hashem's love for the Jewish people and us. There's a lot of cohesion in Judaism that allows us to continue to thrive as a Jewish people and to sustain. And I think that the fact, like you said, that we're winning the wars, but the wars are not being won because we're so great, but because our souls continue to shine and to bring this world, like, basically we're holding up the world through spirituality, through the internal process of like learning and growing and trying to do avodas Hashem and trying to connect with other people, which are all internal processes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is that the internal is so much more powerful and everlasting than anything external. And then the sidebar benefit of tznius and modesty is that it's actually going to raise your self-esteem at the same time.
Right.
That is that we're focusing on the internal, but actually as a benefit, your externals and your self-esteem is also going to rise. I think it's how we achieve true confidence.
Right. So it's teaching confidence. And I'm thinking about the current culture of there's body positivity is a problem that is really culturally a huge problem. I think I heard a talk by Dr. Marcy Forda, who is going to be on the podcast, and she was mentioning that the Jewish Orthodox community suffers from body dysmorphia in a tremendous numbers, in numbers that are like far surpass the regular culture, which is so interesting. How do we reconcile tznius and body positivity and people not feeling attractive? Let's say, I know you brought this up a little bit before about not dressing ugly because that's modest, because modesty doesn't equal ugliness. But I think we have a challenge here that is pretty important to address honestly about body positivity. What would you say to girls struggling with that or women struggling with that?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
It's a very big question. I don't think that we're going to be able to really answer that in a way that's going to fully satisfy the listener, but only because of time. But I will say one thing. In Judaism, we do not cover our bodies out of shame. In the secular society, listen to this piece.
Mm-hmm.
We hide what we are ashamed of, and we expose what we're proud of. We see that if a woman has a great figure, let's flaunt it. We see that in social media. If I'm doing amazing things, if I'm this and if I'm that, I'm going to brag about it, right? In other religions, the body is covered out of shame. The body, especially the female body, is viewed as something bad or enticing or sort of like in a negative way. I mean, without trying to be politically incorrect, but Christianity does view intimacy as something wrong. You should only be intimate if you're married. If you have to, then get married. Muslim religion views the female body as something shameful. If you watch the documentary My Four Daughters, it's unbelievable and eye-opening. But intimacy and the female body and the male body is considered holy. It's powerful, it's not shameful, and we cover that which we are proud of and that which is holy. And to be honest, as I mentioned before, modesty is just as much about exposure as it is about covering, but it's at the right time and with the right person. If you look at the Sefer Torah, which I'm sure you've heard this analogy before, not only is it covered in a beautiful covering and is it put behind the Aron Kodesh, and yes, we hide it most of the time, but then there's a time where it's fully exposed and people are kissing it and we're showing it. But even in between aliyahs, we hide it up again, but not out of shame. It's more so that, just like as you mentioned, jewelry is hidden and you wouldn't wear it on the streets, but you do bring it out at the proper occasions, like Shabbos or a wedding or a beautiful event, right? And that's what you were saying. Hashem is hidden. He's Elem, Ayin Mem. In this Olam, Ayin Lamed Mem. Same letters. Hashem is hidden. And the point of tznius is we want to be more godlike. Let me ask you a question. Who do you love the most in this world?
Again, putting me on the spot here. I'm pretty fond of my cat Lloyd. Who do I love? My children.
Okay, beautiful. Good answer. Why do you love them? Why?
I think that I love their potential for greatness. I love that they're like clean slates in a way that can really grow into like functioning members. I'm enjoying seeing them thrive and getting close to Hashem and having their own relationship. But the real answer is probably because I gave birth to them and I'm a little bit biased, and I think they're so special and wonderful. But I do think part of it is that their potential, their capacity is so great that I love that about them. But okay. Anyway.
No, good. I don't think either of those are the wrong answer. They're both the right answer. But I'm going to tell you something. I have asked thousands of people this question, and I'm not talking 1,000, thousands upon thousands of people in auditoriums for lectures, one-on-one, like we're doing right now. You know what nobody has ever said the reason is. Nobody's ever said this because he's so tall. Oh, because those biceps are rocking. Like that might be, we like people, but that's not love them the most in this world. Everybody, including you, is sharing spiritual answers. The potential, the greatness, they're so good, they're so sweet, right? Those are spiritual answers. We like people. We love people when we see godliness in them. We like more when they bring out the godliness in us. And I believe the essence of modesty, it's bringing out your inner godliness. It's bringing out your inner light.
So let's end with two things. One is, if you had to encourage someone to be modest in a specific way, to take on some Kabbalah, to take on some act of modesty, what would you recommend a listener to start to work on this midah? What would be a recommendation?
Yes. Okay. So as I mentioned, there's two ways to work on it. So I'll give you a recommendation for outside and inside. Talking about out, I'll do outside first. If you want to work on how you dress, right, or something external like bragging or like making sure not to be too. I'll use clothing. Let's use clothing. So I would pick something tiny. I would not try to revamp something. I would either pick it tiny in the sense of frequency, meaning let's say on Shabbos, I'm going to dress more modestly. I have a student that on Shabbat, she covers her hair. Or I have another one who on Mondays, she makes sure to have like a totally modest outfit on, right? So you can work in a small step through frequency, but you could also work on a small step in terms of clothing line. Let's say like you don't really like do exactly the halacha, what it's supposed to be. So just pick one little aspect. If it's elbows, if it's knee, if it's, you want to make sure that when you're sitting down, your knee is covered or whatever. If you were open-toed, not open-toed, pick something small and don't try to do too much at once. That's my first recommendation for the externals of how you're dressing. But if we're talking about the internals, right, of how you're speaking, what you're doing, really, I'll give two recommendations. So, and I believe these are going to tremendously increase confidence more than anything else. So there's really two things you can do. The first is working on anonymous acts of kindness. And you sort of touched on it before. So I'll tell you the story behind why this is so powerful. I had a roommate in college. I totally have to text her and tell her that I'm giving her a shout out, but I'm not going to say her name. Had a roommate in college, very confident young woman, not in a bad way, like a really positive confidence. And I was sort of like, then she was pretty and she was smart and she had a lot of good qualities, but I sort of wonder like what makes her so confident more than other people. And I noticed that she was constantly doing chesed of sorts and never ever talking about it. And not only did she not talk about it, she would like do her best to like not bring it up, never slip it in, never brag about it, never like, just if you make a meal train.
The humble brag.
Yes, the humble brag, great line. Okay, none of that.
Right.
So fast forward, I started teaching for the Jewish Enrichment Center, which is now Olami, but at the time this is in New York City. And I was lecturing for them weekly, and then I led trips to Israel with my husband and my son, and I was teaching all over the place in the north and the south. And we're on the bus, probably heading north or wherever we were heading. And I'm with a student sitting next to her. And this girl, so she was secular, not religious, really beautiful. She had a phenomenal job. She had a boyfriend on the trip. She was like the girl that everybody wanted to be. And she's sitting with me and she's like, Sarah, I have no confidence. And I'm shocked. I'm like, what? Like, you have no confidence. You're the one that everybody wants to be. What are you talking about? And I realized, I suggested to her, I said, why don't you, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, every single day, do something anonymous and don't talk about it, a kindness, any type of anonymous kindness. Don't talk about it. Don't mention it. And let's talk. We'll talk in another few weeks. You'll tell me how it's going. And she came back to me. She said, my confidence has soared because what's happening is when we do things, right, and it's not anonymous or everybody knows about it, we thrive initially off of that recognition. Oh, you get the accolade. Oh, everyone's saying you're so smart. You're so this. Oh, wow, you did that. That's so nice of you. And that feels really good short term. But what happens is we start to depend on that reaction for our self-esteem. It becomes a drug to our self-esteem. And then we don't feel good without it. Whereas if I don't need the recognition, if I don't need the acknowledgement, my confidence starts to build slowly, but then it really is lasting because I'm not relying on you to tell me that I'm great. I know I'm great, and I don't need you to be the one to validate that. The validation doesn't come from the external, the validation starts to come from the internal. Cute story, if I could tell you, when we lived in New York. I'm from Atlanta, I don't know if I mentioned that, and so it doesn't really snow a lot. And when it does, it melts the same day. So we're living in New York, and thank God my husband was so sweet. He was constantly like shoveling out the driveway, shoveling out the pathway. And I'm embarrassed to admit, but I never really thanked him. Like a while passed and I kept forgetting to thank him. So one night we're sitting together talking, and I was like, oh my goodness, I totally have been forgetting to thank you. Every day I keep forgetting. Thank you, thank you, thank you for shoveling the snow. And he looks at me, I promise you, Chadva, he looks at me and he goes, I wasn't shoveling the snow. It's not me. So he's the kind of guy where like, he's like my college roommate where he like always does nice things and he doesn't talk about it. He tries to pretend it's not him. I'm like, Adiv, it's not our 2-year-old. Like it obviously has to be you. Like stop messing around. I promise it's not me. So we're looking at each other. We're like, who's shoveling our snow? We had no idea. We didn't hire anybody to do it. It turned out it was our 60-something-year-old neighbor. He would shovel his driveway and his pathway every morning at the crack of dawn before we were even awake. And then he would do the same for us. And what's crazy is never once did this man ever even hint to that he had been doing it. And that's a beautiful anonymous act of kindness, which that type of thing raises your self-esteem like nothing else.
That's beautiful.
It's a true story. You can't make it up. It's wild.
No, that's wild. Okay. Is there anything that and so this is the final question before we let you go drink tea or whatever you're doing to help with your throat. Is there anything that you wanted, any point about SNEAS that you wanted to bring up that maybe I didn't ask about or something that maybe you wanted to share that you wanted to get across before we end?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it very, very briefly, and I don't know if anybody really picked up on it, but you were talking about men, and I think there's this like disproportionate emphasis on women versus men, and I just want to like bust that myth that modesty is really only for women. But the reality is nope, 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 and nope. Like men are equally obligated in this mitzvah. And modesty is just about clothing. As we mentioned, modesty is really more about character. Modesty is about making women look plain. But the reality is it's not true. I mean, we're not supposed to look ugly. We're not supposed to look unattractive. We are beautiful. We are supposed to reflect that beauty inward and outward. And it's not just for women. This is something that every human can benefit from. Just like we talked about, the neighbor was a male. He was the one doing the snow and not talking about it. Being tzniut is something that any human being can benefit from, and anyone's confidence will skyrocket. And then we won't need to have that type of dysmorphia of the body because the focus will not be on the externals. The focus is on who you really are, which is your internals.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you have a lema. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me one more time the address, the email address, which of course we're going to put in the podcast notes, of where they can register for?
Yes, please, everyone listening, I beg of you, do a mitzvah. It takes less than 10 seconds. Go to com/vote. If you want to link it to me, you can, but it's not necessary. com/vote/Sarah Pachter if you want. But even if you're with me, please register to vote. Takes 2 seconds. It's a mitzvah. You can literally save lives this way. Please take a moment to do so. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. Views expressed by me, your host, and my delightful guest are not necessarily reflective of each other's views, ideas, or life choices. Sometimes we're on the same page, and other times we're not.